The sound of Sophie's laugh still echoed in my ears, even though she had been gone for 49 days. It wasn't just the sound that lingered. Her scent, faint and flowery, clung to the hoodie I couldn't bring myself to wash. The corners of her smile appeared in strangers' faces, flickering and fading like shadows I couldn't chase. Everywhere I turned, Sophie was there and not there. It was like she had sunk into the world around me, haunting every sound, every smell, every silence. And the worst part? No one else seemed to care anymore. I slouched in the back of Mrs. Harper's history class, staring blankly at the whiteboard. The urban decline of Ridgefield, she had scribbled at the top in dry erase marker, as if the slow death of this city was some kind of academic curiosity. Ridgefield wasn't just declining. It was rotting, collapsing from the inside out. The boarded-up shops, the overgrown parks, and the empty houses weren't just signs of decay. They were warnings. Ridgefield was a place that swallowed people. Sophie was proof of that. My hand tightened around the pen in my lap. Sophie didn't just disappear. Everyone said she ran away, but they didn't know her like I did. She was scared of the dark, scared of leaving the house without her pepper spray clipped to her backpack. Sophie wouldn't run, not without telling me. The final bell snapped me out of my haze. Books slammed shut and chairs screeched against the floor as the other students shuffled out, their laughter and chatter filling the room. I stayed in my seat, staring at the blank space on my desk where Sophie used to sit. Her absence carved a hole into every corner of my day, and no one seemed to notice. "Emma," Mrs. Harper's voice broke through the noise. She leaned against her desk, her expression soft with pity. "Are you all right?" I nodded, grabbing my bag and pulling the hood of Sophie's sweatshirt over my head. The last thing I needed was another adult telling me that grief takes time, or that Sophie wouldn't want me to be sad. What did they know about what Sophie wanted? What did anyone know about what happened to her? When I opened my locker, a single piece of paper fluttered out, landing at my feet. My chest tightened. Ridgefield Middle School had been closed for over 30 years. Left to rot like everything else in this city, its crumbling walls were a monument to the tragedies that people here tried to forget. And Sophie had written about it. The page was from her diary. I recognized her sharp, looping handwriting immediately. March 3rd. Something's wrong with Ridgefield Middle. I keep dreaming about it. This dark hallway with broken lockers and a door at the end. Every time I open the door, I wake up screaming. But it's just a dream, right? Still, I can't stop thinking about it. There's something there, something that feels like it's watching me, and I think it's calling me. I stared at the page, my heart pounding. The handwriting wavered at the bottom, as if Sophie's hand had been trembling when she wrote it. "Calling me," I whispered, the words sticking to my tongue like ash. Sophie had never told me about this. She never mentioned Ridgefield Middle in all our late-night talks about ghost stories or the times we dared each other to sneak into creepy places. But now, it all made sense, the way she'd been acting those last few weeks before she disappeared. She was distracted, jumpy, always checking over her shoulder like someone was following her. I shoved the page into my bag, my hands shaking. Sophie had gone to Ridgefield Middle School, and she hadn't come back. That night, I couldn't sleep. The diary page sat on my desk, staring at me like an accusation. I read it again and again, trying to find some clue, some hidden meaning that would make it all make sense. But there was nothing. Just Sophie's fear etched into the paper, as vivid as the sound of her laughter echoing in my memory. The clock glowed red, 2:17 a.m. My bedroom was silent except for the faint hum of the streetlights outside. But then I heard it, a whisper. "Emma." My breath hitched. It was faint, so faint I could have imagined it, but it came again, softer this time, like it was coming from inside my head. "Emma?" I turned on the light, my heart racing. My room was empty. The sound of my own breathing filled the silence, ragged and shallow. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, just a trick of my sleep-deprived brain. But deep down, I knew the truth. Sophie was calling me. The next day, I skipped school and took the bus to Ridgefield Middle. I hadn't been near the place in years, not since that stupid dare when I was 10, the one Sophie and I had chickened out on before we even made it past the fence. Now, standing in front of the chain-link barrier, I felt the same tightness in my chest, the same instinct to turn and run. The school loomed in front of me, its broken windows staring like empty eyes. The bricks were blackened with graffiti, the doors boarded up with rotting wood. The air smelled like mildew and something metallic, something wrong. I gripped the fence, my fingers curling around the cold metal. "Come on, Emma," I muttered to myself. "You can do this." I climbed the fence, my breath fogging in the chilly air. When I dropped down on the other side, the sound of my sneakers hitting the ground echoed in the empty lot. The silence was so thick it felt alive, pressing against my ears like a pair of cold hands. The front doors were padlocked, but one of the boards covering the side entrance had been pried loose, leaving a gap just wide enough for me to squeeze through. I hesitated, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might crack my ribs. But then I heard it again, Sophie's voice, faint and distant, whispering my name. I ducked through the gap. Inside, the air was heavy and stale, thick with the smell of mold and decay. My flashlight cast long, trembling shadows on the walls. The lockers were rusted, their doors hanging open like gaping mouths. Broken glass crunched under my feet, and the sound echoed down the hallway, too loud, too sharp. "Emma?" The whisper came again, louder this time. It wasn't just a voice, it was Sophie's voice. My knees felt weak, but I forced myself to move, following the sound down the dark hallway. The hallway stretched ahead of me, endless and dark, the faint beam of my flashlight cutting through the shadows. My sneakers squeaked against the warped linoleum tiles, each step sending echoes bouncing off the crumbling walls. Lockers lined either side of the hallway, their doors ajar, some hanging off their hinges. I couldn't help but wonder what had been left behind, trapped in the past, like the school itself. "Sophie?" I whispered, my voice barely audible over the hammering of my heartbeat. The only answer was the faint hum of the wind slipping through the broken windows. I tightened my grip on the flashlight, forcing myself to move forward. A faint smell tickled my nose, something metallic, like blood, mixed with the mildew and decay that clung to every surface. It was nauseating, but I swallowed hard and kept going. Sophie's voice had called me here, and I wasn't leaving without answers. The first classroom I passed had its door half off its hinges, the wood splintered like someone had kicked it in. The words, "They see everything," were scrawled across the chalkboard in faded red letters. It could have been old graffiti, or maybe not. My flashlight caught the edge of something on the desk nearest to me, and I froze. A stuffed bear. Its fur was matted and gray, its button eyes dull in the pale light. My throat tightened. I couldn't tell if it was the bear that scared me, or the fact that it looked like it had been placed there deliberately, like a warning. I took a step closer, and that's when I saw the smear of dark red staining its paws. Blood. A chill ran down my spine. "This can't be real," I muttered, shaking my head, but the bear sat there, silent and accusing. I stumbled back, my legs weak, and nearly dropped my flashlight. The sound of a door slamming behind me made me whirl around, the light shaking wildly as I pointed it toward the source of the noise. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice cracking. The hallway was empty, but the echoes of the slam reverberated through the silence, like the building itself was mocking me. I turned back to the bear, but it was gone. My stomach flipped. I scanned the room frantically, my flashlight beam darting over the desks and chairs, but there was no sign of it. No, I whispered, backing out of the classroom. My breath came in short, shallow gasps, and I felt the walls closing in on me. The door slammed again, this time the one I had just backed out of. The echo of the impact made my ears ring, and the vibration seemed to ripple through the air. "Emma," the whisper came again, clearer now. It was coming from somewhere deeper in the school. I forced myself to move, even though every instinct in my body was screaming for me to run. "Sophie," I called, my voice trembling. "Is that you?" My words faded into the darkness, swallowed by the oppressive silence. The hallway opened up into the cafeteria, its tables overturned and scattered across the cracked tile floor. The faint smell of rot was stronger here, and I had to cover my nose with the sleeve of my hoodie to keep from gagging. My flashlight caught the glint of something shiny near one of the tables, and I moved closer. It was a locket. I picked it up, the metal cold against my skin. It was dented and tarnished, but when I opened it, I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. Inside was a tiny photo of Sophie, smiling that wide, carefree smile that I had been trying so hard to hold onto in my memory. Tears stung my eyes as I traced my finger over her face. "How did this get here?" I whispered. Sophie had never mentioned a locket like this. Was it hers? Or had someone else been carrying it? Someone who had been here recently? The cafeteria doors creaked, and I spun around, clutching the locket tightly in my fist. The doors were swinging slowly as if someone had just passed through them. "Hello?" I called, my voice barely above a whisper. The only response was the low groan of the hinges. I stepped through the doors and found myself in another hallway, this one darker than the last. The air felt heavier here, almost suffocating, and my flashlight flickered weakly, like it was struggling to stay alive. That's when I heard it. The sound of footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps echoing in the distance. They didn't sound human. There was something off about them, like they were dragging across the floor. My pulse quickened, and I pressed myself against the wall, trying to steady my breathing. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice shaking. The footsteps stopped. Silence. I inched forward, my flashlight trembling in my hand. The hallway stretched endlessly ahead of me, each step feeling heavier than the last. I could feel the weight of the school pressing down on me, as if the walls were alive, watching, waiting. The footsteps started again, this time closer. "Emma!" The whisper came from directly behind me. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The air felt cold against the back of my neck, and I could feel the presence of someone standing just inches away. I didn't dare turn around. My legs were rooted to the spot, and my flashlight flickered violently, threatening to go out. "Emma?" The voice was clearer now, and I recognized it instantly. It was Sophie. I spun around, my flashlight cutting through the darkness, but there was no one there. The hallway was empty, the shadows stretching and twisting like they were alive. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it might burst out of my chest. "Sophie, where are you?" I shouted, my voice echoing down the corridor. The only response was a faint giggle, high and childlike, coming from somewhere ahead. I gritted my teeth and forced myself to move, my legs trembling with every step. The giggle grew louder, echoing off the walls, until it suddenly stopped, replaced by a deafening silence. And then I saw it. At the end of the hallway, just barely visible in the dim light, was a figure. It was small, hunched over, and shrouded in shadow. My flashlight flickered, and for a brief moment the figure's face came into view, a pale, twisted face with hollow, empty eyes that seemed to pierce through me. I stumbled back, my breath caught in my throat. The figure moved closer, its steps slow and deliberate, and I realized with growing dread that it wasn't walking. It was floating, its feet hovering just above the ground. "Emma!" it whispered, its voice distorted and hollow. My legs finally obeyed my brain, and I turned and ran, the flashlight beam bouncing wildly as I sprinted down the hallway. The sound of its voice followed me, growing louder and more frantic, until it was all I could hear. My legs burned as I ran, the air growing colder with every step. The hallway seemed endless, the lockers and doors blurring together in my panicked flight. Behind me, the sound of that thing's voice, distorted, otherworldly, followed like a shadow I couldn't shake. "Emma? Emma," it called, the voice warping, shifting, like multiple people whispering my name at once. I skidded to a stop at a fork in the hallway, my chest heaving. To my left, the passage was pitch black, the tiles cracked and uneven. To my right, faint light spilled in through a shattered window at the far end, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Neither direction felt safe, but the thought of going deeper into the darkness made my stomach churn. I turned right, sprinting toward the dim light. My sneakers squeaked against the tile, the sound echoing in the empty corridor. But then, halfway down, I froze. The light flickered. Not the soft, natural flicker of a dying bulb, but something deliberate, like someone flipping a switch. I gripped my flashlight tightly, lifting it toward the end of the hallway. My breath caught in my throat as the beam revealed a figure standing in the shadows. It was Sophie. She was standing perfectly still, her head tilted slightly to the side. Her long, dark hair hung over her face, and she was wearing the same hoodie she'd been wearing the day she disappeared, the one with the faded band logo on the front. Her hands dangled limply at her sides, and her feet were bare, the skin pale and ghostly white. "Sophie?" I whispered, my voice trembling. Is that you?" She didn't move. The air around me felt heavy, pressing against my chest like an invisible weight. I took a hesitant step forward, my flashlight shaking in my hand. "Sophie, it's me, Emma. I've been looking for you." Her head snapped up. I stumbled back, nearly dropping the flashlight. Her face was pale and hollow, her eyes sunken and ringed with deep black shadows. But it was her smile that made my blood run cold. It stretched too wide, too unnatural, splitting her face like a jagged wound. "Emma," she said, her voice dripping with malice. It wasn't Sophie's voice anymore. It was something else, something wrong. "You shouldn't have come here." I took another step back, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it would burst. "Sophie, what happened to you?" I asked, tears blurring my vision. "Please, tell me what happened. I came here for you." She tilted her head again, that horrible smile never wavering. "You're not supposed to be here," she said, her voice echoing strangely as if it was coming from all around me. "They don't like it when people come here." "Who?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Who doesn't like it?" Her smile widened, impossibly wide until it looked like it might tear her face apart. "You'll see," she said. And then she vanished. I screamed. 1 second, she was standing there, staring at me with those hollow eyes, and the next, she was gone, leaving only the faint sound of her laughter echoing through the hallway. I spun around, my flashlight darting over the walls, the floor, the ceiling, but there was no sign of her. The building groaned, a low, mournful sound that sent shivers down my spine. I stumbled back toward the fork in the hallway, my mind racing. What was happening? Was it really Sophie? Or was it something pretending to be her? The walls seemed to shift and ripple around me as I moved, the air growing colder with every step. My flashlight flickered again, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw something moving in the corner of my vision, a shadow darting just out of reach. "Emma." The voice was back, softer this time, almost gentle. It wasn't Sophie's voice anymore, but it was familiar, too familiar. I couldn't place it, but it sent a chill through me, like an icy hand gripping my spine. I turned a corner and nearly tripped over something lying in the middle of the hallway. My flashlight beam landed on it, and I felt bile rise in my throat. It was a pile of bones. The skeleton was small, childlike, the bones brittle and yellowed with age. Scraps of fabric clung to the remains, what looked like the tattered remnants of a school uniform. I clapped a hand over my mouth, my stomach lurching. Who were they? How long had they been here? Before I could think, the sound of footsteps echoed behind me again, slow, deliberate, growing closer with each passing second. I scrambled to my feet, my flashlight trembling as I pointed it back down the hallway. Nothing. The footsteps stopped. I took a shaky breath, backing away from the skeleton. But as I turned to keep moving, I saw something written on the wall above it, words scrawled in what looked like dried blood. "It's not just them, it's you, too." My head spun. What did it mean? My flashlight flickered again, and this time it went out completely, plunging me into darkness. I smacked it against my palm, desperate to bring the light back, but it refused to turn on. "Emma," the voice was right behind me now, so close I could feel the cold breath on my neck. My body froze, paralyzed with fear. I wanted to run, to scream, to do anything but stand there, but my legs refused to move. Something cold brushed against my shoulder. I turned, and for a moment there was nothing but darkness. My chest heaved as I strained my eyes, trying to pierce through the pitch black. Then, out of the void, the faint outline of a figure emerged. Just a silhouette at first, then more details came into focus as my eyes adjusted. It wasn't Sophie. The figure was tall and gaunt, its limbs unnaturally long and thin like they'd been stretched too far. Its head tilted at an odd angle as if its neck were broken. I couldn't make out its face, but I could feel its eyes on me, cold and unrelenting. My legs finally obeyed me, and I stumbled back, slamming into the wall behind me. Who are you?" I stammered, my voice trembling. The figure didn't respond. It didn't move. It just stood there, watching me. My flashlight was still dead in my hand, useless against the oppressive darkness. The silence stretched on, heavy and suffocating, until I couldn't take it anymore. "Leave me alone," I shouted, the sound of my voice echoing down the hallway. And then it moved. It didn't walk. It didn't float. It just shifted, like the space between us folded in on itself. 1 second it was at the end of the hallway, and the next it was inches from my face. its head craning downward to meet my gaze. Its breath was cold, smelling of decay and something worse, something ancient and unnatural. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The thing leaned closer, its face still obscured by the shadows. Then, in a voice that was both a whisper and a roar, it spoke. "You don't belong here." I didn't think. I just ran. My body moved on instinct, adrenaline surging through my veins as I sprinted down the hallway. The air felt heavier with every step, like the building itself was trying to trap me, to drag me down into its decaying depths. The sound of my footsteps echoed all around me, mixing with the faint, hollow laughter that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I didn't know where I was going. Every hallway looked the same, a labyrinth of crumbling walls and broken doors. The school felt alive, its walls breathing, its floors groaning beneath my feet. My heart pounded in my chest, the panic threatening to overtake me. Then I saw it, a faint light, flickering at the end of the corridor. It wasn't the cold, unnatural light of my flashlight, or the pale glow of the moon through a broken window. It was warm, golden, almost inviting. It spilled out from beneath a door, illuminating the cracks in the warped wood. Without thinking, I ran toward it, desperate for any sign of safety. I threw open the door and stumbled inside, slamming it shut behind me. My chest heaved as I leaned against the door, my body trembling with exhaustion and fear. The room was small, lined with dusty bookshelves that sagged under the weight of their forgotten contents. A single desk sat in the center, its surface cluttered with old papers and a flickering lantern. The air was thick with dust, and the faint scent of something burning lingered in the air. I moved toward the desk, drawn to the light of the lantern. The papers scattered across the surface were covered in writing, messy, frantic scribbles that were barely legible. But as I leaned closer, I realized they weren't just random words. They were names. Dozens of names, written over and over again, as if the writer had been obsessed. My stomach dropped when I saw Sophie's name among them. My hands shook as I picked up one of the papers, my eyes scanning the chaotic scrawl. The writing was disjointed, fragmented, like the person who had written it was losing their mind. "They see you. They know you. They are you." I dropped the paper, my breath catching in my throat. What did it mean? Who were they? And why was Sophie's name written here, over and over again? The sound of creaking floorboards made me whirl around, my heart leaping into my throat. The door I had slammed shut was now slightly ajar, the faintest sliver of darkness creeping in. I backed away, clutching the lantern like a lifeline. "Emma." The voice was soft, almost tender, but it sent a chill through me all the same. It was Sophie's voice again. Or at least, something pretending to be her. The door creaked open wider, and I could see a shadow moving in the hallway beyond. I took another step back, my foot catching on the edge of the desk. "Sophie?" I whispered, my voice trembling. "Is that you?" The shadow stopped, just outside the door. For a moment there was silence. Then slowly the figure stepped into the room. It was Sophie, or at least it looked like her. Her face was pale and gaunt, her eyes sunken and hollow. But there was something wrong, something inhuman about the way she moved, her limbs jerking unnaturally as she stepped closer. "You shouldn't have come here," she said, her voice low and hollow. "They'll take you too." "Who?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "Who will take me?" She didn't answer. Instead, she reached out, her fingers curling around my wrist. Her touch was ice cold, and I gasped, trying to pull away, but her grip was like iron, unrelenting. "You can't leave," she whispered, her face inches from mine. "They won't let you." The lantern flickered, its light dimming as the shadows in the room grew darker, deeper. I could feel the presence of something, many somethings, pressing in around me, their whispers filling the air. The room felt smaller, the walls closing in, the darkness swallowing the faint light of the lantern. "Sophie, please," I begged, tears streaming down my face. "Let me go, please." Her grip loosened, and for a moment her expression softened. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I didn't mean for this to happen." Before I could respond, the lantern went out completely, plunging us into darkness. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, until they were deafening. I felt something cold brush against my face, then my arms, then my legs, as if unseen hands were reaching out for me, and then I screamed. The scream tore from my throat, echoing in the darkness, but the shadows devoured the sound. My chest felt like it was collapsing, the air thick and suffocating. The unseen hands brushed against my skin again, light, fleeting touches that made my entire body shudder. I thrashed wildly, trying to escape the invisible presence that seemed to surround me. "Sophie!" I cried out, my voice cracking. "Where are you?" The only response was the whispers. They swirled around me, growing louder and more frantic. Words I couldn't understand, layered and overlapping, filled my ears. It was like the walls themselves were speaking, their voices seeping into my bones. I pressed my hands over my ears, trying to block them out, but it was no use. "Emma." The voice cut through the chaos, sharp and clear. It was Sophie again, but different. Her voice was strained, desperate. "You have to get out." The darkness shifted, and for a brief moment I thought I saw her face. Her expression was twisted with fear, her eyes wide and pleading, but just as quickly as she appeared, she was gone, swallowed by the shadows. "How?" I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "I don't know how." The whispers grew louder, rising to a deafening crescendo. The room felt like it was spinning, the walls bending and warping around me. My flashlight still refused to work, its dead weight useless in my hand. I stumbled forward, my arms outstretched, searching for anything that could lead me out. Then I felt it. A hand grabbed mine, small and cold, but solid. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. For a moment I couldn't move, but then the hand gave a gentle tug, pulling me forward. "This way," Sophie's voice whispered, faint and wavering. "Hurry!" I didn't hesitate. I let her guide me, stumbling blindly through the darkness. My legs ached, my lungs burned, but I kept moving, her hand pulling me along. The whispers followed, growing fainter with each step until they were little more than a distant murmur. A faint light appeared ahead, soft and flickering like a dying candle. I felt a rush of relief, my heart pounding with hope. Sophie's hand tightened around mine, urging me forward. "Almost there," she said, her voice barely audible. The light grew brighter as we approached, and I could make out the outline of a door. It was old and heavy, its surface scratched and splintered, but it was real, a solid escape from the nightmare that surrounded me. Sophie let go of my hand, and I stumbled toward the door, my fingers fumbling for the handle. I pushed it open, and the light spilled over me, warm and golden. For a moment, I couldn't see anything, my eyes adjusting to the sudden brightness. Then the room came into focus. It was the gymnasium. The bleachers were pushed against the walls, the basketball hoops dangling from rusted chains. The floor was littered with broken glass and debris, but the light from the shattered skylights above made it feel almost peaceful. I collapsed onto the floor, my body trembling with exhaustion and relief. I wasn't alone. There were others in the gym, their figures standing motionless in the shadows. My heart sank as I realized they weren't alive, at least not anymore. Their skin was pale and translucent, their eyes hollow and lifeless. Some of them were children, their small bodies frozen in eerie stillness, while others were adults, their expressions twisted with pain. They were watching me. I scrambled to my feet, my back pressing against the wall. Who are you?" I stammered, my voice trembling. The figures didn't move, but their eyes followed me, their empty gazes piercing through the air. "Sophie," I whispered, my voice cracking. "Are you here?" One of the children stepped forward, her movements slow and deliberate. Her face was pale and sunken, her hair tangled and matted. She looked at me with an intensity that made my stomach churn, and when she spoke, her voice was soft but filled with sadness. "You shouldn't have come here." The gym began to change. The light from the skylights dimmed, replaced by a cold, unnatural glow that seemed to seep from the walls themselves. The figures in the shadows started to move, their heads turning in unison to face me. Their mouths opened, but no sound came out, only the faint hiss of air escaping their lips. I backed away, my breath quick and shallow. "I don't understand," I said, shaking my head. "What do you want from me?" The girl stepped closer, her hollow eyes fixed on mine. "It's not what we want," she said. "It's what they want." "They?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. "Who are they?" She didn't answer. Instead, she raised her hand and pointed to the far corner of the gym. My flashlight flickered back to life, its beam weak but steady, illuminating the spot she had indicated. My blood ran cold. The figure from before, the tall, gaunt one with the broken neck, was there, standing in the corner, its head tilted toward me, its empty eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. The other figures seemed to bow their heads as if in deference to the creature. "They don't let anyone leave," the girl said, her voice trembling. "Not once they've found you." I turned to run, but the gym doors slammed shut, the sound reverberating through the air. The tall figure began to move, its body jerking and twitching as it stepped closer. The other figures followed, their hollow eyes fixed on me. "Sophie!" I screamed, desperation clawing at my throat. "Help me!" But she didn't come. The figures closed in, their movements slow but unrelenting. My flashlight flickered, the light growing dimmer with each passing second. I backed into the wall, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst. "Please," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "Please, let me go." The tall figure loomed over me, its shadow swallowing the faint light of my flashlight. It leaned down, its face inches from mine, and for the first time I saw its eyes, black voids that seemed to pull me in, endless and consuming. "You belong to us now," it whispered, its voice a low growl that sent shivers down my spine. And then everything went dark. Darkness surrounded me, thick and suffocating, like I'd been submerged in a black ocean. I couldn't see, couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The cold seeped into my skin, clawing its way into my bones. My heartbeat pounded in my ears, each beat slower than the last, as though time itself was unraveling. Then, out of the silence, came the whispers. At first they were faint, like distant voices carried on the wind, but they grew louder, closer, until they were right next to me, hissing in my ears. I couldn't understand the words. They weren't in any language I knew, but the tone was clear. Anger, hunger, despair. And then, through the cacophony of voices, one word broke through. "Emma," Sophie's voice. It wasn't warped or distorted this time. It sounded like her, real, clear, alive. I clung to the sound, letting it anchor me in the suffocating darkness. "Sophie?" I called, my voice trembling. "Where are you? I can't see anything." The whispers stopped, and the silence that followed was almost worse. My chest tightened, panic clawing at my throat as I reached out blindly in the dark. My fingers brushed against something cold and smooth. Metal. A wall? A door? I turned, and my heart nearly stopped. Sophie was standing in front of the door, her body glowing brighter now, almost blinding. Her expression was calm, her fear replaced by a quiet determination. She reached out, her hand brushing my shoulder. "Go," she said softly. I didn't understand. "What, Sophie, Go," she shouted, her voice breaking. "I can't hold it for long. You have to go, now." The creature let out another roar, its body trembling as it tried to move, but Sophie raised her other hand, and the light around her intensified. The thing recoiled, its growls turning into pained, guttural cries. Tears streamed down my face as I turned back to the door. This time, the handle turned easily in my hand and the door creaked open. Bright light spilled out, warm and golden, and for a moment, I felt something I hadn't felt since Sophie disappeared. Hope. I stepped through the door, but before it closed, I turned back to her. "Sophie, come with me, please." She smiled faintly, tears glistening in her glowing eyes. "I'm sorry, Emma, I can't." The door slammed shut, and everything went silent. When the door slammed shut, the world changed around me. The oppressive darkness was gone, replaced by a soft, golden light that filled the space. It was warm, comforting, almost dreamlike, and for a moment I thought I'd escaped. But the ache in my chest, the raw, gnawing grief, told me I hadn't. I was still inside Ridgefield Middle School, still caught in its web. The room I was in was strange, almost surreal. It looked like a classroom, but everything was wrong. The desks were too small, the walls too narrow, the chalkboard was blank, cracked in the corners, and the windows were covered with a thick, black mist that pulsed like a living thing. The air felt heavy, thick with the same metallic scent I'd smelled before. "Sophie?" I called, my voice echoing faintly. There was no response. The silence pressed against my ears, loud and suffocating. I glanced around, my heart sinking as I realized I was alone. Sophie was gone. Whatever she had done, whatever she had sacrificed, had left me here, alone in this strange liminal space. I wrapped my arms around myself, shivering despite the warmth of the light. Then I saw it. On the desk closest to me was Sophie's locket, the same one I had found earlier in the cafeteria, the one with her picture inside. But now, it was pristine, the metal polished and shining like it was brand new. I picked it up, my hands trembling, and opened it. The picture inside had changed. It wasn't Sophie anymore. It was me. I dropped the locket, my breath catching in my throat. It clattered to the floor, spinning like a coin before coming to a stop. My heart pounded as I backed away, my mind racing. Why was my picture in the locket? What did it mean? Before I could process it, the walls began to shift. The mist covering the windows seeped into the room, curling around the desks and chairs like tendrils of smoke. The golden light dimmed, replaced by a sickly, greenish glow that made my skin crawl. The temperature dropped sharply, and my breath came out in visible puffs. The whispers started again. They were faint at first, like distant murmurs, but they grew louder, more distinct, until I could make out the words. "Emma, you can't leave. Emma, it's not over." I pressed my hands over my ears, trying to block them out, but it was no use. The voices were everywhere, inside and outside my head, twisting and overlapping until they became a deafening roar. The walls seemed to close in around me, the room shrinking, suffocating. Then the door creaked open. I spun around, my heart racing as I stared at the door. Beyond it was darkness, not the thick, oppressive blackness I'd seen before, but a strange, shimmering void that seemed to pulse with its own rhythm. I could feel it pulling at me, like it was alive, like it wanted me to step through. I didn't want to go. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to stay, to turn back, to do anything but step into that void. But then I heard it, Sophie's voice, faint and distant, coming from somewhere deep inside. "Emma, please." My chest tightened. She sounded so small, so fragile, like she was barely holding on. I swallowed hard, my throat dry, and took a hesitant step toward the door. "Emma," the voices came again, louder this time, angry and insistent. "You can't leave. You're one of us now." "No," I whispered, shaking my head. "I'm not. I don't belong here." The void seemed to shift, the darkness rippling like water. Sophie's voice came again, stronger this time. "Emma, you have to come. Now." I clenched my fists, forcing myself to move. My legs felt heavy, like I was wading through quicksand, but I kept going, stepping through the doorway and into the void. The darkness swallowed me whole, and for a moment, I felt like I was falling. The air rushed past me, cold and sharp, and the whispers faded into nothing. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the falling stopped, and I found myself standing in another hallway. It was the same hallway I'd run through earlier, but something was different. The air was still and heavy, and the lockers were no longer rusted and broken. They were pristine, their blue paint gleaming under the flickering fluorescent lights. The floor was clean, the tiles polished to a mirror shine. It looked new. I turned slowly, my eyes scanning the hallway. It was empty, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. My reflection stared back at me from the polished floor, distorted and warped by the flickering light. Then I heard it, a faint, rhythmic tapping, like footsteps on tile. My stomach dropped as the sound grew louder, closer, until it was just around the corner. I pressed myself against the wall, holding my breath. The footsteps stopped, and the silence stretched on, heavy and oppressive. I closed my eyes, counting the seconds, waiting for something, anything, to happen. "Emma." The voice was right next to me. I opened my eyes and my breath caught in my throat. It was me. I was staring at myself, but it wasn't really me. The thing standing in front of me had my face, my clothes, even the same tear-streaked expression. But its eyes were wrong. They were hollow and black, like bottomless pits, and they seemed to pull at me, drawing me in. What are you?" I whispered, my voice trembling. It smiled, a cold, empty smile that sent shivers down my spine. "Don't you see?" it said, its voice a distorted echo of mine. "You've always been here." "No," I said, shaking my head. "That's not true. I don't belong here." The thing stepped closer, its movements slow and deliberate. "You belong here," it said. "Just like Sophie, just like all of us." My back hit the wall, and I felt the cold seeping through my clothes. The thing reached out, its hand hovering inches from my face. "It's time, Emma," it said. "Time to let go." "No," I screamed, pushing past it and running down the hallway. My footsteps echoed off the walls, the sound bouncing around me until I couldn't tell which way was forward. The thing's laughter followed me, hollow and mocking, growing louder with every step. The hallway seemed endless. No matter how far I ran, no matter how fast my feet pounded against the floor, the same polished tiles and gleaming lockers stretched ahead of me. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed and flickered, casting erratic shadows that twisted and warped on the walls. I was trapped, running in a loop that felt designed to break me. Behind me, the laughter grew louder, reverberating through the air like the toll of a distant bell. It wasn't just the hollow sound of my own distorted voice anymore. It was joined by others. Dozens of voices, laughing, whispering, calling my name. Emma. Their tones were taunting, cruel, but laced with something else. Hunger. A primal need that made my skin crawl and my stomach churn. I forced myself to keep running, even as my lungs burned and my legs screamed in protest. There had to be a way out. There had to be. Then I saw it. A door appeared at the end of the hallway, tall and imposing, its surface made of dark, polished wood. It wasn't like the other doors I'd seen in the school. This one was pristine, untouched by decay or time. It didn't belong here, and somehow I knew neither did I. Emma. The voices grew louder, more frantic, as if they could sense I was getting closer to something they didn't want me to find. My reflection in the polished tiles twisted and warped, its features stretching and distorting until it was unrecognizable. I looked away, focusing on the door. It was my only chance. I reached it just as the whispers turned into screams, sharp and piercing. My hands fumbled for the handle, my fingers trembling. The metal was cold under my touch, and for a moment it wouldn't turn, no matter how hard I twisted. Panic bubbled in my chest, but I bit down on it, forcing myself to focus. "Let me in," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "Please let me in." The door creaked open. I stumbled inside, slamming the door shut behind me. The sudden silence was deafening. The whispers and laughter were gone, cut off as if they'd never existed. My breathing was ragged, my chest heaving as I leaned against the door, trying to steady myself. The room was different from the others I'd seen. It was small and dimly lit, the walls lined with shelves crammed full of dusty books and old photographs. A single desk sat in the center, its surface cluttered with papers, candles, and a small, ornate mirror. The air was heavy with the scent of wax and something bitter, like burnt herbs. I moved toward the desk, my footsteps echoing softly in the quiet room. The mirror caught my attention first. Its frame was intricate, carved with symbols I didn't recognize, and the glass shimmered faintly, as if it were alive. My reflection stared back at me, pale and wide-eyed, but there was something wrong with it. Something I couldn't quite place. Next to the mirror was a photograph. I picked it up, my hands shaking. It was a group photo of children, their faces lit with smiles that didn't reach their eyes. The background was unmistakable. It was Ridgefield Middle School, back when it was still open. But what caught my attention wasn't the children or the school. It was the girl standing at the edge of the group. It was Sophie. I stared at the photograph, my mind racing. She looked younger, her hair shorter, but it was unmistakably her. My best friend, smiling faintly, her gaze distant, as if she didn't belong there. And maybe she didn't. The date scrawled at the bottom of the photo read 1986, more than 3 decades before Sophie or I were even born. "What is this?" I whispered, my voice trembling. "How is this possible?" The mirror shimmered again, and this time my reflection changed. It wasn't me anymore. It was Sophie. She stared back at me, her expression blank, her eyes hollow. Her lips moved, forming words I couldn't hear. I leaned closer, my heart pounding, trying to make sense of it. "Emma." Her voice echoed faintly, but it wasn't coming from the mirror. It was behind me. I spun around, the photograph slipping from my fingers and fluttering to the floor. Sophie stood in the corner of the room, her figure half hidden in the shadows. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with fear, and she was shaking her head. "Emma, you shouldn't be here," she said, her voice trembling. "You need to leave, now." I stepped toward her, tears blurring my vision. "Sophie, what's going on? What is this place? Why are you here?" She backed away, her movements jerky and unnatural, like a puppet on invisible strings. "They brought me here," she whispered, "and now they've brought you. But you can still leave. You have to leave before it's too late." "Leave?" I repeated, my voice breaking. "How? I don't even know where I am. I don't know how to get out." Her gaze flicked to the mirror. "The mirror," she said, her voice barely audible. "It's the only way, but you have to hurry. They're coming." The door rattled behind me, the sound sharp and violent. My stomach dropped as the whispers started again, muffled but growing louder. The room seemed to darken, the air thickening with an oppressive weight. Sophie's eyes darted to the door, then back to me. "Go!" she cried, her voice urgent. "Now, Emma, go!" I turned to the mirror, my heart racing. The glass shimmered, rippling like water. My reflection was gone, replaced by a swirling void of light and shadow. I hesitated, fear rooting me to the spot. What if it was a trap? What if the mirror led somewhere worse? "Emma!" Sophie screamed, her voice cutting through my panic. "It's your only chance." The door burst open, and the room was flooded with darkness. The whispers erupted into a deafening roar, and I felt cold hands clawing at my arms, my legs, dragging me backward. I screamed, reaching out for the mirror, my fingers brushing against the glass. And then I fell. The darkness swallowed me whole, spinning and twisting around me. I couldn't see, couldn't hear, couldn't feel. My mind felt like it was unraveling, pieces of myself slipping away into the void. I wanted to scream, to cry, but I couldn't. Then, slowly, the darkness began to fade. Light seeped in around the edges, growing brighter and warmer, until I was no longer falling. I was standing in a familiar hallway, the polished tiles gleaming under the fluorescent lights. I was back in Ridgefield Middle School. But something was different. The hallway was empty, silent, and the air felt lighter, almost peaceful. For a moment I thought I was safe, but then I saw it. My reflection in the glass of a nearby window. It wasn't me. I froze, my gaze locked on the glass. The figure staring back at me wasn't me. Not really. Its face was mine, but its eyes, those hollow black voids that seemed to stretch endlessly into nothingness, they weren't mine. And its expression, twisted into a crooked smile, cold and knowing, sent a shiver down my spine. I stepped back, my heart racing, but the reflection didn't move. It stayed perfectly still, watching me with that unnerving smile, like it was waiting for something. My stomach churned, and I forced myself to look away, but the image was burned into my mind. "This isn't real," I whispered to myself, my voice trembling. "It's not real." But it felt real. The polished tiles beneath my feet, the faint hum of the fluorescent lights, the chill in the air, it all felt real. Too real. And yet I knew I wasn't safe. Not here. Not anywhere in this place. I forced myself to move, my legs shaking as I walked down the hallway. Each step echoed loudly in the silence, the sound unnervingly sharp. The school was empty, eerily still, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see the creature from before, but there was nothing, just the long, empty corridor stretching behind me. Still, the unease clung to me. Like a shadow, I couldn't escape. I passed classroom after classroom, their doors slightly ajar. Inside, the desks were perfectly aligned, the chalkboards clean, as if the school was still in use. But there were no students, no teachers, just an oppressive silence that seemed to grow heavier with every step. Finally, I reached a stairwell at the end of the hallway. The steps spiraled downward, disappearing into darkness. I hesitated, my hand gripping the cold metal railing. Something about the stairs felt wrong, like they were pulling me toward them, beckoning me to descend. But what choice did I have? The hallway behind me felt like a dead end, a loop that would trap me if I stayed. And Sophie's words echoed in my mind. "You have to keep going." I swallowed hard and took the first step. The stairs creaked under my weight, the sound unnaturally loud in the stillness. My flashlight flickered, its beam cutting through the darkness, but it barely reached the bottom. The air grew colder as I descended, the walls narrowing around me. It felt like the school was alive, its heartbeat thrumming faintly in the back of my mind. About halfway down, the whispers started again. At first, they were faint, almost indistinguishable from the creak of the stairs and the hum of the flashlight. But they grew louder, more distinct, until I could hear the voices clearly. "Emma," they called, drawing my name out like a taunt. "Emma, come closer." I tried to ignore them, focusing on the steps beneath my feet. But the voices didn't stop. They multiplied, overlapping, each one more frantic than the last. Some sounded like children, their voices high-pitched and pleading. Others were deeper, guttural, almost inhuman. "Emma, help us. You can't leave. They'll never let you go." I pressed my hands over my ears, trying to drown them out, but the whispers were inside my head, drilling into my thoughts. My vision blurred and I stumbled, barely catching myself on the railing. My flashlight slipped from my hand, clattering down the stairs and disappearing into the darkness below. "No," I shouted, my voice echoing in the stairwell. The sound seemed to startle the whispers, and for a moment they faded into silence. But then I heard it. a low, guttural growl that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. The growl grew louder, accompanied by the sound of something heavy dragging across the floor below. My breath caught in my throat as I strained to see into the darkness, but without my flashlight, it was impossible. I turned to run back up the stairs, but the way I'd come was gone. The stairs stretched endlessly above me, spiraling into a void of shadows. My chest tightened, panic clawing at my throat. I was trapped. "Emma." The voice was soft, almost gentle, but it was wrong. It came from behind me, too close. I froze, my entire body trembling as I felt a cold breath against the back of my neck. Slowly, I turned. It was the creature. Its towering, grotesque form was barely visible in the dim light, but its glowing eyes burned into mine, filled with an unnatural hunger. Its body twitched and jerked as it moved closer, its limbs unnaturally long and twisted. The growl rumbled deep in its chest, vibrating through the air. I backed away, my feet slipping on the narrow stairs. "Stay back," I whispered, my voice shaking. "Don't come any closer." The creature tilted its head, its glowing eyes narrowing. "You can't leave," it said, its voice a guttural snarl. "You belong here." "No," I said, shaking my head. "I don't belong here. I'm not like you." It smiled, its jagged teeth glinting in the faint light. "Aren't you?" it asked, taking another step toward me. "You came here, didn't you? You stayed. You listened." I shook my head again, tears streaming down my face. "I didn't have a choice. I came here for Sophie." The creature let out a low, rumbling laugh. "Sophie belongs here, too. Just like you. Just like all of us." I took another step back, my heel catching on the edge of a stair. I stumbled, nearly falling, but I caught myself on the railing. The creature's laughter grew louder, echoing off the walls, as if it was feeding off my fear. "Leave me alone," I screamed, my voice cracking. "I don't belong here." The creature stopped, its glowing eyes narrowing. For a moment, it was silent, and I thought maybe, just maybe, it would let me go. Then it lunged. I threw myself to the side, barely avoiding its claws as they slammed into the stairs where I'd been standing. The force of the impact shook the stairwell, and I lost my footing, tumbling down the steps. Pain shot through my body as I landed at the bottom, my head spinning. The creature growled, its footsteps heavy as it descended after me. I forced myself to my feet, my vision swimming, and stumbled forward. A faint light glowed in the distance at the end of another hallway. It was my only chance. I ran, ignoring the pain in my legs and the throbbing in my head. The creature roared behind me, its footsteps growing louder, faster. I could feel its presence bearing down on me, the air around me growing colder with every step. The light grew brighter, closer, until I could see the outline of another door. I reached it just as the creature lunged again, its claws swiping through the air. My hand closed around the handle and I threw the door open, diving inside. The door slammed shut behind me, and the world went silent. I leaned against the door, gasping for breath, my body trembling from the effort. The silence was overwhelming, almost oppressive after the chaos of the stairwell. My heart pounded in my chest, and I could still feel the creature's cold breath on my neck, even though I knew it was gone, at least for now. The room I'd stumbled into was different from the others I'd seen. It was smaller, almost claustrophobic, with walls made of smooth, polished stone that gleamed faintly in the dim light. There were no windows, no doors other than the one I had just come through. The only source of light was a single, flickering bulb hanging from the ceiling, casting strange, shifting shadows across the walls. At the center of the room was a pedestal, and on it sat something that made my stomach twist. It was Sophie's diary. I approached it cautiously, my legs trembling beneath me. The pedestal seemed to glow faintly, its surface carved with strange symbols that looked like they didn't belong in any language I'd ever seen. The diary sat in the center, its cover worn and faded, just like I remembered it. But there was something wrong with it now, something off. The pages fluttered faintly, as if moved by an invisible breeze, even though the air in the room was still. My fingers hovered over it, hesitant, before I finally picked it up. The leather felt cold and damp against my skin, and the weight of it seemed heavier than it should have been. I opened it to the first page, my breath catching in my throat as I read the words scrawled there. March 3rd. I can feel it watching me. It's everywhere, in the walls, in the floors, in my head. I can't escape it. I can't run. It knows me. It's always known me, and now it knows Emma too. The handwriting was Sophie's, sharp and familiar, but the words didn't make sense. My hands shook as I flipped through the pages, each one filled with frantic scribbles and disjointed sentences. They want her. They'll take her. They'll take me. We're the same, Emma and me. We always were. Emma, I'm sorry. I didn't mean for this to happen. I didn't mean for you to find me. You can't leave, Emma. None of us can. I slammed the diary shut, my breathing ragged. My mind raced, trying to make sense of the words. Sophie had written this. She'd known what would happen, known that I would follow her here. But why? Why hadn't she warned me? The light overhead flickered, and the room grew colder. I turned toward the door, my stomach sinking as I realized it was gone. The smooth stone walls were seamless now, with no sign of the door I'd entered through. I was trapped. Emma. The voice was soft, barely more than a whisper, but it sent a chill through my body. I turned back to the pedestal and my heart stopped. Sophie was standing there, her figure pale and ghostly in the dim light. Her eyes were wide and glassy, filled with a sorrow that seemed to pierce through me. Sophie, I whispered, tears streaming down my face. You're here. You're alive. She shook her head, her expression pained. No, Emma, I'm not alive. I haven't been alive for a long time. My chest tightened. That's not true, I said, my voice breaking. I saw you. You called me here. I called you because I didn't have a choice, she said, cutting me off. They made me. They needed you to come. They needed you to stay. Stay? I whispered, the word catching in my throat. Why? What do they want from me? Her gaze dropped to the diary in my hands. They don't want you, she said softly. They want what you are. I shook my head, confusion and fear twisting in my stomach. What does that mean? What am I? She didn't answer. Instead, her eyes flicked to something behind me, and her expression twisted into one of pure terror. Emma, run. Before I could move, the light bulb overhead shattered, plunging the room into darkness. The air grew heavy, thick with the metallic scent of blood and decay. The whispers started again, louder this time, more frantic, overlapping until they became an unbearable roar. Emma? The voices called, their tones mocking and hungry. You can't run. You can't hide. I clutched the diary to my chest, backing away from the pedestal. My hands fumbled in the darkness, searching for a wall, a door, anything that could lead me out. But the walls were smooth and cold, unyielding. There was no way out. Then I felt it. A hand on my shoulder, cold and skeletal. I screamed, spinning around, but there was no one there. The whispers grew louder, and I felt the presence of something massive, something ancient, looming over me. You belong to us now, the voices said, their tones blending into one, deep and resonant. You always have. No, I whispered, my voice trembling. That's not true. I don't belong here. The darkness around me shifted, swirling like a living thing. Shapes moved within it, twisted, shadowy figures with glowing eyes that burned into my soul. They circled me, their whispers growing louder, more insistent. Stay with us, Emma, they said. Stay forever. The diary in my hands began to glow faintly, its warmth cutting through the cold. I opened it, desperate for some kind of answer, and the words on the pages seemed to shift and change before my eyes. The mirror, the words read. Find the mirror. It's the only way. The mirror. My mind raced as I remembered the ornate mirror I'd seen earlier, the one that had shimmered like water. If it was still here, if I could find it, maybe, just maybe, I could get out. I turned in the darkness, clutching the diary like a lifeline. The figures in the shadows hissed, their voices rising in anger as I began to move. The glow from the diary lit my path, faint and flickering, but it was enough. I pushed forward, ignoring the whispers, the cold hands that clawed at my arms and legs. And then I saw it. The mirror stood at the far end of the room, its surface rippling like liquid silver. The ornate frame glowed faintly, the strange symbols etched into it, pulsing with light. My heart raced as I ran toward it, the whispers growing louder, more frantic. Emma, don't! Sophie's voice rang out, sharp and desperate. You don't know what's on the other side. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the glass. Her figure appeared behind me, her eyes filled with fear. Please, she said, her voice breaking. Don't leave me here. Don't leave me alone. Tears streamed down my face as I looked at her. I'm sorry, I whispered. I can't stay. And then I stepped into the mirror. The sensation of stepping into the mirror was unlike anything I had ever experienced. The glass wasn't solid. It rippled around me like water, pulling me forward and swallowing me whole. For a moment, I felt weightless, suspended in an endless void of light and shadow. The whispers faded, replaced by an eerie silence that pressed against my ears. And then I fell. The world twisted and spun around me, colors and shapes blurring together in a chaotic whirlwind. I couldn't tell which way was up, couldn't tell if I was moving or standing still. My stomach churned, and I clutched the diary tightly against my chest, as if it was the only thing keeping me grounded. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the falling stopped. My feet hit solid ground, and I stumbled forward, gasping for air. I wasn't in the school anymore. The first thing I noticed was the light. It was bright and cold, washing over everything with an unnatural bluish hue. I stood in the middle of a vast empty space, the ground beneath me smooth and reflective like polished glass. The air was still, too still, and carried a faint metallic tang that made my throat dry. All around me, the void stretched endlessly in every direction, the horizon blending into the pale, glowing sky. It was disorienting, like standing in the middle of a dream or a nightmare. "Sophie?" I called out, my voice echoing faintly in the emptiness. "Are you here?" The only answer was my own voice, distorted and distant, bouncing back at me from somewhere far away. I took a cautious step forward, the sound of my footsteps muffled against the smooth ground. My reflection stared back at me from below, warped and rippling with every step. It was wrong. Its eyes were too dark, its smile too wide, twisting and curling in a way that made my stomach turn. I stopped, my breath catching in my throat. The reflection wasn't following me anymore. It stood still, watching me, its hollow eyes filled with malice. "Who are you?" I whispered, my voice trembling. The reflection smiled wider, its teeth sharp and jagged. "I'm you," it said, its voice a distorted echo of mine. "The real you." I stumbled back, shaking my head. "No," I said, my voice barely audible. "That's not true. You're not me." The reflection tilted its head, its smile never wavering. "You've always known, haven't you?" it said, its tone mocking. "This place, this school, it's not just haunted, it's alive and it's been waiting for you." I clutched the diary tighter, my knuckles white. "You're lying," I said, though the words felt hollow in my mouth. "I don't belong here." The reflection stepped closer, its movements fluid and unnatural, like it was gliding across the glass. "Oh, but you do," it said. "You've felt it, haven't you? The pull, the connection, you're part of this place, Emma. Just like Sophie, just like all the others." "Others?" I repeated, my voice shaking. "What others?" The reflection's smile widened and it gestured behind me. I turned, my breath catching in my throat as I saw them. Dozens of figures stood in the distance, their forms pale and ghostly, their faces blurred and indistinct. They were children, adults, teachers, all of them staring at me with hollow eyes that burned with a faint, unnatural light. They didn't move, but their presence was overwhelming, pressing against me like a physical weight. "Who are they?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. "They're the lost," the reflection said, its tone almost gleeful. "The ones who came here just like you, the ones who stayed." I turned back to the reflection, anger and fear boiling inside me. "I'm not staying," I said, my voice stronger now. "I'm getting out of here." The reflection laughed, a hollow, chilling sound that echoed in the empty space. "You still don't get it, do you?" it said. "There is no out. There's only here. This place is you now, and you are it." I shook my head, backing away. "No," I said. "That's not true. I can leave. I can—" "Then go," the reflection said, cutting me off. "Run. Escape. But it won't matter. You'll always come back. This place will always bring you back." The figures in the distance began to move, their ghostly forms gliding closer. Their whispers filled the air, growing louder and more frantic with every step. "Stay with us, Emma," they said. "Stay forever." I turned and ran. The ground beneath me rippled and shifted as I ran, the reflective surface twisting and warping like liquid. The whispers grew louder, the figures moving faster, their pale forms closing in around me. I clutched the diary to my chest, my heart pounding as I searched for something, anything that could lead me out. Then I saw it. In the distance, barely visible against the glowing horizon, was another mirror. It stood alone, its ornate frame glowing faintly, the symbols etched into it pulsing with light. It shimmered like water, just like the one I had stepped through before. Hope surged in my chest, and I sprinted toward it, ignoring the whispers, the figures, The reflection that still followed me, its mocking laughter ringing in my ears. The mirror grew closer, its surface rippling as if it were alive. The figures reached for me, their cold hands brushing against my arms, my legs, but I pushed forward, desperate to escape. I reached the mirror and didn't hesitate. I threw myself into it, the cold, rippling glass swallowing me whole. This time, the fall was slower, the void around me quieter. The whispers were gone, replaced by a faint hum that vibrated through my body. Light surrounded me, warm and golden, and I felt a strange sense of peace wash over me. When I landed, I was back in the school. But it wasn't the same. The hallway was empty, silent, but it didn't feel oppressive anymore. The air was lighter, the darkness gone. My flashlight flickered to life in my hand, its beam steady and strong. I took a cautious step forward, my footsteps echoing faintly. The diary was still in my hands, its cover warm to the touch. I opened it, my breath catching as I read the words on the first page. "You made it out, but you'll never really leave." I slammed the diary shut, my chest tightening. The hallway stretched ahead of me, endless and familiar, and as I walked, the whispers started again, faint and distant, like a memory I couldn't escape. The whispers wrapped around me, faint but persistent, like a melody I couldn't ignore. Their voices were soft, almost inviting now, but beneath the sweetness was an undercurrent of dread, a pull that made my chest tighten. I gripped the diary, its familiar weight grounding me, though its presence felt more like a curse than a comfort. Every step forward was heavier than the last, the endless hallway stretching ahead like a cruel joke. The air shifted. It wasn't just cold anymore, it was alive. A faint breeze brushed past me, carrying with it the faint scent of mildew and something metallic. The walls seemed to hum, faint vibrations rippling through the floor. I paused, holding my breath, and the whispers grew louder, clearer. "Emma," they called, soft and lilting. "You're home now." I shook my head, my heart pounding. "I'm not staying," I muttered, my voice cracking. "I don't belong here." The laughter that followed was sharp and mocking, echoing through the corridor. It wasn't just one voice, it was dozens, maybe hundreds, overlapping in a cacophony that made my ears ring. I stumbled forward, clutching the diary tighter as the sound closed in around me. Then I saw it. A door stood at the end of the hallway, tall and dark, its surface etched with the same strange symbols that covered the mirror. The air around it seemed to shimmer, the edges of the door blurring like a heat mirage. I felt its pull immediately, an invisible force tugging at my chest, urging me forward. The whispers grew softer as I approached, their tone shifting from mocking to almost pleading. "Don't go," they said. "Stay with us. Stay where you belong." I hesitated, my hand hovering over the door handle. The metal was cold, even without touching it, and the symbols etched into it glowed faintly. My heart raced as I glanced behind me. The hallway was empty, but I could feel them, the lost souls, the shadows, the thing that had pretended to be Sophie, watching, waiting. "Emma," one of the voices called, louder than the others. It sounded like Sophie, but I couldn't trust it. Not anymore. I turned back to the door. "This has to be the way out," I whispered to myself. "It has to be." Before I could lose my nerve, I grabbed the handle and pulled. The door creaked open, revealing a staircase that spiraled upward into darkness. The air was colder here, sharper, and carried the faint scent of burning wood. My stomach churned, but I forced myself to step inside, the diary clutched tightly in my hands. The door slammed shut behind me, the sound reverberating through the narrow space. I flinched, my breath hitching, and turned to find that the door had disappeared, replaced by a seamless wall of stone. There was no going back now. I started to climb. Each step creaked under my weight, the sound unnervingly loud in the silence. The staircase seemed endless, twisting and turning, the darkness above and below pressing in on me. My legs ached, my lungs burned, but I kept going, driven by some instinct I couldn't name. Then halfway up, I heard it. A faint sound, like footsteps echoing above me. They were slow, deliberate, and too heavy to belong to Sophie, or anyone else who might belong in this place. My chest tightened as the sound grew louder, closer, until it felt like whoever or whatever was above me was just out of sight. I stopped, gripping the railing, my heart pounding in my ears. "Hello?" I called, my voice trembling. "Is someone there?" The footsteps stopped. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then from somewhere above, a low guttural growl echoed down the staircase. My blood ran cold. It wasn't human. I turned and ran. The staircase seemed to stretch endlessly in both directions, but I didn't care. I sprinted downward, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The growl followed me, louder and more menacing, accompanied by the sound of something heavy scraping against the walls. I didn't dare look back. The air grew colder with every step, the darkness pressing in around me. My flashlight flickered weakly, its beam barely cutting through the gloom. I clutched the diary like a lifeline, its presence the only thing tethering me to reality. Finally, I reached the bottom of the staircase, or what I thought was the bottom. The steps ended abruptly, leading to a narrow hallway that stretched out into the darkness. I stumbled forward, my legs shaking, and glanced over my shoulder. The growling had stopped. For a moment, I thought I was safe. But then I felt it, a cold breath against the back of my neck. I froze, my entire body trembling. Slowly, I turned. It was the creature from before, its grotesque form barely visible in the faint light of my flashlight. Its glowing eyes burned into mine, filled with malice and hunger. Its body twitched and shifted, its jagged teeth glinting as it smiled. "You can't leave," it said, its voice a low, guttural growl. "You're ours now." I stumbled back, my breath catching in my throat. "I don't belong here," I said, my voice shaking. "Let me go." The creature tilted its head, its smile widening. "You already belong," it said. "You've always belonged." I shook my head, tears streaming down my face. "No," I whispered. "That's not true." It lunged. I threw myself to the side, narrowly avoiding its claws as they slammed into the wall. The impact shook the hallway, dust and debris raining down from the ceiling. I scrambled to my feet, my flashlight clattering to the floor, and ran. The hallway twisted and turned, its walls narrowing and shifting like a living thing. The creature's growls echoed behind me, growing louder with every step. My legs burned, my lungs ached, but I pushed forward, desperate to escape. Then I saw it, a faint light at the end of the hallway. It was small, barely visible, but it was there. My heart leapt, and I sprinted toward it, ignoring the creature's snarls and the cold, clawing hands that seemed to reach for me from the shadows. The light grew brighter closer, until I could make out the outline of another door. This one was different from the others. Its surface was smooth and plain, unmarked by symbols or carvings. It looked normal. I reached the door just as the creature lunged again, its claws grazing my shoulder. Pain shot through me, but I didn't stop. I grabbed the handle and yanked the door open, throwing myself inside. The door slammed shut behind me, and everything went silent. The silence was absolute. My chest heaved as I pressed my back against the door and clutching my shoulder where the creature's claws had grazed me. The fabric of my hoodie was torn, and my skin burned beneath it, but there was no blood, just a deep, throbbing ache that made my entire arm tremble. The room I had entered was small and plain, its walls stark white and unadorned. A single light bulb hung from the ceiling, casting a faint, sterile glow over the space. There were no windows, no other doors, just 4 smooth walls and the door I had come through. It felt too perfect, too clean, and it set my nerves on edge. I slid down to the floor, hugging the diary to my chest, and tried to catch my breath. The creature's growls were gone, and the whispers that had followed me for so long were silent now. But the quiet wasn't comforting. It was oppressive, heavy, like the air itself was watching me. "Sophie," I whispered, my voice trembling. "If you're here, please, say something." Nothing. The silence stretched on, unbroken. For the first time since I'd entered Ridgefield Middle School, I felt truly alone. I opened the diary, desperate for some kind of answer, some clue about what I was supposed to do next. The pages were blank. Every word, every frantic scribble Sophie had written was gone, leaving behind only empty, yellowed paper. My stomach twisted, and I flipped through the diary faster and faster, but it was useless. "No," I whispered, shaking my head. "No, no, no." The last page stopped me cold. Unlike the others, it wasn't blank. 4 words were scrawled across it in thick, jagged letters, the ink smudged as if written in haste. "This is the beginning." My hands trembled as I stared at the words. The beginning of what? Was this some kind of cruel joke? I wanted to scream, to throw the diary across the room, but something held me back. The words felt important, like a warning, or a promise. The light bulb above me flickered, casting erratic shadows across the room. The air grew colder, and I felt that familiar weight pressing down on my chest. Something was wrong. The walls seemed to shift, the edges of the room blurring, and I scrambled to my feet, clutching the diary like a lifeline. "Emma?" The voice was soft, barely more than a whisper, but it froze me in place. I turned slowly, my heart pounding, and saw her. Sophie stood in the corner of the room, her figure bathed in the flickering light. She looked different now. Her face was pale and drawn, her eyes sunken and tired, her hands were trembling, and her shoulders slumped as if she were carrying an invisible weight. She looked fragile. "Sophie," I breathed, tears welling in my eyes. "You're here. You're really here." She didn't respond. Her eyes met mine, and for a moment I thought I saw something in them, a flicker of recognition, of warmth. But then her gaze shifted, her expression hardening. "You shouldn't have come here," she said, her voice low and flat. I took a step toward her, my heart aching. "I had to," I said, my voice trembling. "I had to find you. I couldn't just—" "You don't understand," she interrupted, shaking her head. "It's too late. They've already found you." I froze, my blood turning to ice. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "Who's found me?" Her gaze dropped to the diary in my hands. "It's not just a book," she said. "It's a key, and you've already used it." "A key to what?" I asked, desperation clawing at my throat. "Sophie, please, tell me what's going on." She didn't answer. Instead, she took a step back, her figure fading slightly, like a shadow being swallowed by the light. "I'm sorry, Emma," she said, her voice breaking. "I tried to protect you, but it's too late now." "No," I cried, reaching for her. "Don't go, Sophie, please." But she was already gone. The walls began to close in, the smooth white surface cracking and splintering like glass. The light bulb flickered wildly, casting long, jagged shadows across the room. The air was heavy, suffocating, and the whispers returned, louder and more frantic than ever. "Emma, stay. Emma, it's not over." I stumbled back, my hands shaking as I clutched the diary. The floor beneath me shifted, rippling like water, and I fell to my knees. The whispers were deafening now, their words blurring together in a chaotic cacophony that made my head spin. Then, through the noise, I heard it. A single, clear voice. "Run!" The floor gave way beneath me, and I was falling again, the diary slipping from my hands as the void swallowed me whole. The air rushed past me, cold and biting, and the whispers followed, growing fainter with every second. My heart pounded, my mind racing, as the darkness stretched endlessly around me. And then, just as suddenly as it started, the falling stopped. I landed hard on a cold stone floor, the impact knocking the wind out of me. I lay there for a moment, gasping for breath, my body trembling. The whispers were gone, and the air was still again, but I didn't feel safe. Not yet. I sat up slowly, my head spinning, and looked around. I was in another hallway, this one darker and narrower than the others. The walls were rough and uneven, the floor cracked and littered with debris. A faint, flickering light illuminated the space, casting eerie shadows that danced along the walls. The diary was lying a few feet away, its cover slightly torn. I crawled toward it, my hands trembling, and picked it up. The pages were blank again, except for one. "You can't run forever." A chill ran down my spine, and I clutched the diary to my chest, my breath coming in shallow gasps. I didn't know where I was, didn't know what was waiting for me, but I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't alone. The hallway stretched ahead of me, its jagged walls narrowing with each step I took. The faint, flickering light was dimmer now, barely illuminating the space, and my shadow stretched unnaturally along the uneven floor. The air was colder here, heavier, and every breath I took felt like I was inhaling ice. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, something just out of sight, waiting for me to falter. The diary weighed heavily in my hands, its torn cover rough against my palms. I didn't dare open it again. Whatever was written inside, it didn't matter anymore. All I knew was that I had to keep moving. I had to find a way out. The whispers started again, faint and distant, like echoes bouncing off the walls. I quickened my pace, my heart pounding, but the whispers followed, growing louder with every step. They weren't just calling my name anymore. They were laughing, mocking, their tones sharp and cruel. "Emma," one voice sang high and lilting. "You can't leave," another joined it, deeper and raspier. "Why do you run? You belong here." I shook my head, clenching my teeth as I pressed forward. "I don't belong here," I muttered, my voice trembling. "I'm leaving. I'm getting out." The laughter swirled around me, filling the narrow hallway, until it felt like the walls themselves were laughing. I stumbled, my knees buckling, and pressed my back against the cold stone. My flashlight flickered weakly in my hand, its beam barely cutting through the darkness. And then the voices stopped. The sudden silence was almost worse than the laughter. It pressed against my ears, thick and suffocating, and I held my breath, straining to hear anything. Footsteps, whispers, the scrape of claws. But there was nothing, just the sound of my own heartbeat, pounding loudly in the stillness. I pushed myself to my feet, my legs trembling, and took a cautious step forward. The hallway seemed to stretch endlessly now, the flickering light casting strange, shifting shadows on the walls. My footsteps echoed faintly, each one louder than the last, until it felt like someone was walking behind me. I froze. Slowly, I turned, my flashlight shaking in my hand. The hallway behind me was empty, but the shadows danced unnaturally, twisting and writhing as if alive. My breath caught in my throat, and I tightened my grip on the flashlight, taking a step back. That's when I saw it. The shadow in the corner didn't move like the others. It didn't flicker or ripple. It stood still, its edges sharp and defined, its form unnaturally tall and thin. My heart sank as it began to move, its head tilting at an unnatural angle as it stepped toward me. I stumbled back, nearly dropping the flashlight. "Stay back," I whispered, my voice shaking. "Don't come any closer." The shadow didn't stop. It moved slowly, deliberately, its shape shifting and twisting as it advanced. The light from my flashlight seemed to bend around it, unable to touch it, as if it existed outside of the world I knew. "Emma," it whispered, its voice low and hollow. "You can't run." I turned and ran, my footsteps echoing loudly in the narrow hallway. The shadows writhed around me, their movements erratic and unnatural, as if they were reaching for me. The air grew colder with every step, and my flashlight flickered violently, threatening to go out. The hallway twisted and turned, narrowing further until I had to duck to avoid hitting my head. My breath came in short, ragged gasps, and my legs burned with the effort of running. But I couldn't stop. I couldn't look back. The whispers returned, louder and more frantic, blending together into a chaotic chorus. "Emma, come back. Stay with us. You can't escape." My head spun, the voices drilling into my mind, but I pushed forward, focusing on the faint light that flickered ahead. It was small, barely visible, but it was there, a tiny beacon in the suffocating darkness. I reached it just as the hallway opened into another room. My feet hit the uneven floor, and I stumbled, catching myself on the edge of a rusted table. The whispers stopped abruptly, leaving behind a heavy silence that pressed against my ears. The room was large and empty, its walls lined with rusted lockers and broken desks. The floor was cracked and uneven, littered with debris that crunched under my shoes. The air smelled of mildew and decay, and the faint light from a single flickering bulb cast eerie shadows across the space. In the center of the room stood a mirror. It was tall and ornate, its frame carved with the same strange symbols I had seen before. The glass shimmered faintly, rippling like water, and I felt its pull immediately, a magnetic force drawing me toward it. My stomach churned, and I took a hesitant step forward, the diary clutched tightly against my chest. This was it, the way out. But something was wrong. The mirror's surface rippled again, and for a brief moment I saw something on the other side. It wasn't the hallway I had come from, or the school as it had been before. It was a void, a swirling, endless darkness that seemed to pulse with life. I stopped, my breath catching in my throat. "No?" I whispered, shaking my head. "This isn't right." "Emma?" The voice came from the mirror, soft and distorted. I stepped closer, my reflection coming into view. It was me, but it wasn't. Its eyes were dark and hollow, its smile cold and twisted. It tilted its head, watching me with a knowing expression. "You've come so far," it said, its voice echoing faintly. "But you're not leaving. Not yet." I backed away, my hands trembling. "You're not me," I said, my voice shaking. "You're not real." The reflection laughed, a sharp, hollow sound that sent shivers down my spine. "I'm as real as you are," it said, "and you'll see soon enough." The surface of the mirror rippled again, and the reflection stepped forward, its dark eyes locking onto mine. I stumbled back, the diary slipping from my hands and falling to the floor. The room grew colder, the shadows closing in around me. "You can't run, Emma," it said, its smile widening. "You've always been here. You'll always be here." My legs felt like lead, my body frozen as the reflection stepped closer, its form solidifying as it emerged from the glass. I wanted to scream, to run, but I couldn't move. The air was thick, suffocating, and the whispers returned, louder and more frantic than ever. And then, everything went dark. The darkness wasn't just around me, it was inside me, filling my lungs, my veins, my mind. I felt like I was sinking, the weight of it pulling me deeper and deeper into an endless void. My body was numb, my thoughts sluggish, and for a moment I thought I might dissolve into nothing. But then faintly I heard it, a voice. Emma. It was Sophie's voice, soft and clear, cutting through the suffocating dark. The sound sent a shock through me, like a lifeline pulling me back from the edge of oblivion. My chest tightened, and I forced myself to breathe, the air cold and sharp in my lungs. Sophie? I whispered, my voice barely audible. Where are you? The darkness began to shift, faint shapes emerging from the void. At first, they were blurry, indistinct, but as my vision cleared, I realized I was back in the school. The hallway stretched ahead of me, its walls cracked and worn, the faint hum of the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. But something was different. The air felt heavier, thicker, and the shadows seemed to ripple and move on their own. The diary was gone, the comforting weight of it no longer in my hands. I looked around frantically, searching for some sign of Sophie, but the hallway was empty. Emma? Her voice came again, faint and distant, echoing through the corridor. I turned toward the sound, my heart pounding. Sophie, I shouted, my voice trembling. Where are you? Please, tell me where you are. There was no answer, only the faint sound of her laughter, soft and haunting, drifting through the air. It sent shivers down my spine, but I followed it, my footsteps echoing loudly in the silence. The hallway twisted and turned, narrowing until the walls felt like they were closing in around me. My flashlight flickered weakly in my hand, its beam barely cutting through the gloom. The laughter grew louder, sharper, until it wasn't just Sophie's anymore. It was joined by others, dozens of voices, their tones blending into a chaotic, mocking chorus. Emma, they sang. Emma, Emma. I pressed my hands over my ears, trying to block out the sound, but it was inside my head, drilling into my thoughts. My legs felt heavy, my body trembling with exhaustion, but I forced myself to keep moving. Then suddenly the laughter stopped. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The hallway stretched ahead of me, silent and still, the air heavy with anticipation. My flashlight flickered again, and for a moment I thought I saw something, movement in the shadows. And then I heard it. A low, guttural growl, deep and resonant, vibrating through the walls. My stomach dropped, and I turned slowly, the flashlight shaking in my hands as I pointed it toward the sound. At the far end of the hallway, just barely visible in the dim light, was the creature. It was larger now, its twisted form hunched and contorted, its limbs unnaturally long. Its hollow eyes glowed faintly in the darkness, and its jagged teeth gleamed as it smiled. The sight of it sent a wave of terror through me, and I stumbled back, my legs nearly giving out beneath me. You can't run, it said, its voice a low, rumbling growl. You can't leave. I turned and ran. The hallway seemed to stretch endlessly, the walls twisting and warping as I sprinted forward. The creature's growls echoed behind me, its footsteps heavy and deliberate, shaking the floor with each step. My chest burned, my lungs screaming for air, but I didn't dare stop. The shadows around me began to move, reaching out with long, claw-like tendrils that brushed against my arms and legs. The air grew colder, sharper, and the whispers returned, their voices blending with the growls in a chaotic cacophony that filled my head. Emma, stay. Emma, it's not over. I stumbled, my foot catching on a crack in the floor, and fell hard onto my hands and knees. Pain shot through my body, but I scrambled to my feet, ignoring the blood dripping from my palms. The creature was closer now, its growls louder, more menacing. I could feel its breath on the back of my neck, cold and rancid, and I forced myself to move, my legs shaking with every step. Ahead of me, the hallway opened into a large room, its walls lined with mirrors. They were cracked and warped, their surfaces rippling like water, and as I stepped inside, I saw my reflection, dozens of versions of me, each one twisted and wrong. Their eyes were hollow, their faces pale and gaunt, and they moved on their own, separate from me. I turned in a circle, my heart pounding as the reflections began to laugh, their voices sharp and cruel. You can't escape, they said. their voices overlapping. "You'll never leave." I backed away, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The creature stepped into the room, its massive form towering over me, its glowing eyes locked onto mine. The reflections laughed louder, their twisted smiles stretching wider as the creature reached for me. "Emma," it growled, its voice a deep rumble that shook the walls. "It's time." "No," I screamed, throwing my flashlight at the creature. It shattered against its chest, the light flickering once before going out completely. The room plunged into darkness, the laughter and growls fading into silence. For a moment, I thought I was alone. But then I felt it, a hand on my shoulder, cold and firm. I froze, my breath catching in my throat, and turned slowly. It was Sophie. Her figure glowed faintly in the darkness, her eyes wide with fear. "Emma," she said, her voice trembling. "You have to wake up." "Wake up," I whispered, my voice shaking. "What do you mean?" "I'm awake." She shook her head, her expression pained. "No, you're not," she said. "This place, it's not real. It's a nightmare, and if you don't wake up now, you never will." The ground beneath me began to shift, cracking and splintering like glass. The reflections in the mirrors twisted and warped, their hollow eyes burning brighter, their laughter echoing around me. "Sophie, I don't understand," I said, tears streaming down my face. "How do I wake up?" She reached out, her hand brushing against mine. "You have to let go," she said, "of me, of this place, of everything." "I can't," I whispered, my voice breaking. "I came here for you. I can't leave you." Her gaze softened and she smiled faintly. "I'll always be with you," she said. "But you have to go." The ground shattered beneath me and I fell. The fall seemed endless, the void swallowing me whole as the fragments of the mirrors above dissolved into nothing. The air rushed past me, cold and biting, but I couldn't feel my body anymore, just the weight of Sophie's words echoing in my mind. "You have to let go." I didn't understand. How could I let go of her? Of this? It felt like every step I'd taken, every moment since Sophie disappeared, had led me here. The thought of leaving her behind, of abandoning her again, twisted in my chest like a knife. But as I fell, I realized something. This wasn't about Sophie anymore. It was about me, about why I'd come to Ridgefield Middle School, why I'd followed her voice into the darkness. I wasn't just searching for her. I was searching for something to fill the void she left behind. "You have to let go." The words settled deep in my mind, and for the first time, I wondered if this place had been waiting for me all along. Not to trap me, but to show me the truth. The fall slowed, the air growing still and warm. Light seeped into the darkness, soft and golden, until I was no longer falling, but standing. My feet touched solid ground, and I looked around, my breath catching in my throat. I was in a classroom. It wasn't like the broken, decaying rooms I'd seen before. This one was intact, frozen in time. The desks were neatly arranged, the chalkboard clean and blank. A faint breeze stirred the curtains on the windows, though they looked out onto nothing but white light. At the front of the room stood Sophie. She wasn't the ghostly, fragile figure I'd seen before. She looked alive, whole, the Sophie I remembered. Her hair fell in loose waves over her shoulders, and she wore the hoodie I'd given her for her birthday last year, the one with the faded band logo she loved so much. She smiled at me, and for a moment, everything else faded away. "Sophie," I whispered, tears welling in my eyes. "You're here." She nodded, her smile soft and sad. "I've always been here, Emma," she said, "but you shouldn't be." I stepped closer, my hands trembling. "I came for you," I said. "I couldn't just leave you. I couldn't let you disappear." Her expression didn't change, but there was something in her eyes, something heavy, like she was carrying a weight I couldn't see. "You didn't come for me," she said. "You came because you didn't want to be alone." The words hit me like a punch to the chest, and I stumbled back, shaking my head. "That's not true," I said, my voice trembling. "I came because I love you. You're my best friend." "And I'll always be your best friend," she said, stepping toward me. "But this place, it's not for you, Emma. It's for the lost, and you're not lost. Not yet." The classroom began to shift, the edges of the walls rippling like water. The breeze grew stronger, the light outside the windows dimming. Sophie glanced toward the door at the back of the room, her smile fading. "They're coming," she said. "You have to go." I turned to the door, my stomach twisting. The whispers were back, faint and distant, growing louder with each passing second. I could feel them, pressing against the edges of the room, clawing their way inside. "I can't leave you," I said, my voice breaking. "Not again." Sophie shook her head, her gaze soft but firm. "You're not leaving me," she said. "I'm already gone. I've been gone for a long time. But you," she placed her hand over her heart, "you're still here, and you have to stay that way." Tears streamed down my face as the whispers grew louder, more frantic. The room trembled, the light flickering, and I knew I didn't have much time. I reached out, my fingers brushing against hers, and for a moment it felt real, solid, like nothing had changed. "Goodbye, Sophie," I whispered, my voice cracking. Her smile wavered and she stepped back, her figure beginning to fade. "Goodbye, Emma," she said, "and thank you for everything." The door burst open and the darkness rushed in. The shadows clawed at me, pulling me toward the door, but I didn't fight them. I clutched the memory of Sophie's smile, her warmth, and held it close, letting it guide me. The classroom dissolved around me, the walls breaking apart into fragments of light and dark. The whispers surrounded me, louder than ever, but this time, they didn't scare me. I pushed forward, my step steady, until I found myself standing in front of another mirror. It shimmered faintly, its surface smooth and still, and I knew it was my way out. I placed my hand against the glass, and it rippled beneath my touch. The whispers screamed, the shadows recoiling, but I didn't hesitate. I stepped through. The world came rushing back all at once. I was standing outside Ridgefield Middle School, the cold night air sharp against my skin. The building loomed behind me, dark and silent, its windows broken and empty. The moon hung low in the sky, casting pale light over the overgrown yard. I turned back toward the school, my chest tight. For a moment I thought I saw her, Sophie, standing in the window of the second floor, her figure faint and flickering. She raised her hand and I raised mine, tears streaming down my face. Then she was gone. I walked away from Ridgefield Middle School that night, the weight of the past still heavy on my shoulders. But something had changed. Sophie was gone, yes, but she wasn't lost. Not to me. I carried her with me, in my heart, in my memories, and I always would. The whispers never left me completely. Sometimes in the quiet moments I could still hear them, faint and distant, like a memory I couldn't escape. But I wasn't afraid anymore. Because I knew, no matter how loud they got, I wouldn't let them pull me back. I wouldn't let go of myself. We appreciate you tuning in to the premiere episode of our exciting new series. Your support means everything. Please like, comment, and share this with your friends. Stay connected for more amazing content coming your way.